The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Sheriff Tom Bradley wiped the sweat from his brow. The radio crackled with static as he pressed the button, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Base. This is Bradley. We're going to need more water out here. And maybe a priest." He paused, looking at the two figures trapped beneath the massive boulder. "It's not looking good." Marcus and Michael Chen had been hiking the Superstition Mountains for 3 days when disaster struck. The identical twins, both 26 years old, had taken this trip to celebrate Marcus's engagement to Sarah. What was supposed to be a joyful adventure had turned into a nightmare when a flash flood triggered a rock slide, pinning them both beneath a granite boulder the size of a small car. The rescue had been ongoing for 18 hours. Emergency crews had tried everything: hydraulic jacks, airbags, even controlled explosives at a safe distance. Nothing worked. The boulder was wedged between two cliff faces in such a way that moving it seemed impossible without causing further collapse. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the emergency medical coordinator, knelt beside the trapped men. Her examination had revealed the harsh reality. Marcus was pinned from the waist down, his legs crushed, but his vital organs intact. Michael, however, had suffered internal injuries. His breathing was shallow, his pulse weak. "Sheriff," Dr. Walsh called softly, motioning him away from the twins. "I need to speak with you privately." "Why?" They walked a few steps away, out of earshot. The doctor's face was grim. "We're losing Michael. His internal bleeding is getting worse. And with the pressure on his chest, his lungs are filling with fluid. Marcus is stable, but if we don't get them out soon." "How long does Michael have?" Bradley asked. "Hours, maybe less. And here's the problem. Any attempt to free Marcus quickly could cause vibrations that might collapse more rock onto Michael. But if we take the time to carefully extract Michael first, Marcus might not make it either. The longer this goes on, the more both of their conditions deteriorate." Sheriff Bradley felt the weight of an impossible decision. He had been in law enforcement for 22 years. But nothing had prepared him for this. The engineering team had presented him with stark options. They could attempt a rapid extraction of one brother, but it would almost certainly doom the other. Or they could continue trying to save both and likely lose them both. As he walked back toward the trapped brothers, Bradley's radio crackled again. "Sheriff, we've got someone here who says he can help. Says he knows these mountains." Bradley looked up to see an older Navajo man approaching the rescue site. The man was perhaps 60 years old, weathered by years under the desert sun, wearing worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt. His long gray hair was pulled back in a traditional braid, and his dark eyes held a calmness that seemed out of place in the chaos of the rescue operation. "I'm Joseph Begay," the man said simply. "I've lived in these mountains all my life. My grandfather taught me things about these rocks that your engineers don't know." Bradley looked skeptical. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but we have professional rescue teams working on this." Joseph's eyes moved past the sheriff to the trapped brothers. Marcus was conscious and talking softly to his unconscious twin. The sight seemed to move something in the older man. "Sheriff, those boys are going to die if you keep doing what you're doing. I can see it in the way the rocks are sitting. Mr. Begay, I can't just let." Bradley started. "My people have lived with these mountains for centuries. We know how they move, how they breathe. That boulder isn't just sitting there by accident. It's being held by smaller rocks beneath it. Like a puzzle. Your machines are trying to force it, but these mountains don't respond to force." Dr. Walsh approached. "Sheriff, Michael's pressure is dropping. We're running out of time." Bradley looked between the doctor and Joseph Begay. Every instinct told him to trust the professional rescue teams, but 18 hours of failure spoke louder than protocol. "What are you proposing, Mr. Begay?" Joseph stepped closer to the boulder, studying it with the intensity of someone reading a familiar book. He walked around the entire formation, occasionally placing his hand on different rocks, listening to sounds the others couldn't hear. "This boulder is like a seed in a pod," he said finally. "Your people are trying to crack the pod, but that will destroy the seed. We need to open it the way nature intended. That's not exactly scientific, Dr. Walsh interjected. Joseph turned to her with patient eyes. Doctor, how many flash floods have you seen in these mountains? How many rock slides? I've seen hundreds. I know how they fall. And I know how they can be undone. Marcus, still conscious beneath the rock, had been listening to the conversation. His voice was weak but clear. Please. Just save Michael. Don't worry about me. Michael stirred slightly at his brother's voice, his eyes fluttering open for a moment. No. Both of us. Or neither. The brothers had been inseparable since birth. Marcus was older by 12 minutes, and had always been the protector. The one who took risks so Michael wouldn't have to. Michael was the artist, the dreamer, while Marcus was practical and grounded. But in this moment, both showed the same stubborn loyalty that had defined their relationship. Sheriff Bradley made his decision. Mr. Begay, what do you need? Joseph looked around at the assembled rescue workers, paramedics, firefighters, engineers, volunteers. I need them to stop what they're doing and listen. And I need some strong backs who aren't afraid of getting their hands dirty. The request didn't sit well with Captain Rodriguez, the head of the technical rescue team. Sheriff, this is highly irregular. We have protocols, Captain. Your protocols aren't working, Bradley replied firmly. Mr. Begay, you have 30 minutes to show me something. If it doesn't work, we go back to the original plan. Joseph nodded solemnly. 30 minutes will be enough to start. But Sheriff, once we begin this way, there's no going back. We follow the mountain's lead, not our own timeline. As the rescue teams reluctantly stepped back, Joseph began examining the rock slide more closely. He pointed to specific stones, explaining in his quiet voice how each piece fit into the larger puzzle. You see this rock here? It's what we call a keystone. Remove it wrong, and everything falls. Remove it right, and everything shifts into place. He called over 4 of the strongest volunteers. We're going to work together, but you follow my lead exactly. No rushing, no forcing. The mountain will tell us when it's ready. Dr. Walsh monitored the twins' vital signs as Joseph began his unconventional rescue attempt. Sheriff, she whispered, I hope you know what you're doing. Michael's blood pressure is critical. Bradley watched as the Navajo man directed the volunteers to begin removing smaller rocks from around the boulder's base. Each stone was chosen deliberately, removed carefully, placed precisely. It seemed impossibly slow given the urgency of the situation. Trust the process, Joseph said softly when he noticed the sheriff's anxiety. Sometimes the longest way is the shortest way home. As they worked, Joseph told the volunteers about his grandfather, who had been a medicine man and had taught him to read the language of stone and earth. He always said the mountains are alive. They have their own wisdom. We just have to remember how to listen. Marcus remained conscious, talking quietly to Michael when his brother stirred. Remember that time we got lost camping when we were 12? Marcus said. Dad was so worried, but you knew exactly which way to go. You always could see things I couldn't. Michael's eyes opened briefly. You were always the brave one. Always protecting me. Not this time, brother. This time we're getting out together. Dr. Walsh checked her watch. Michael's condition was deteriorating rapidly. She caught Sheriff Bradley's eye and shook her head slightly. Time was running out, but Joseph seemed to sense something the others missed. Almost there, he said quietly. The mountain is starting to let go. He positioned the volunteers around a specific rock formation. On my count, we lift together. Not fast, not slow, just steady, like breathing. As they worked, a small group of Navajo people arrived at the rescue site. Joseph's family and friends from the reservation had heard about the situation and come to help. They stood in a circle around the rescue area, singing softly in their native language. What are they doing? Captain Rodriguez asked. Praying, Joseph replied simply. Asking the mountain spirits to release these boys. Sheriff Bradley found himself caught between his practical law enforcement background and something deeper, something that spoke to the mystery and power of the desert landscape he had served in for over 2 decades. He had seen enough in these mountains to know there were things that couldn't be explained by science alone. The singing grew stronger as Joseph directed the final phase of his plan. The volunteers worked in perfect synchronization, following his quiet commands. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the massive boulder began to shift. "That's it," Joseph whispered. "She's letting go." The boulder moved just inches, but it was enough. Dr. Walsh immediately saw that the pressure on Michael's chest had eased. His breathing became less labored. "We need to move fast now," Joseph said, "but carefully. The mountain has given us a window, but windows can close." As the rescue teams moved in to extract the twins, Joseph stepped back, his part completed. Sheriff Bradley approached him, amazement and gratitude clear on his face. "How did you know?" Bradley asked. Joseph looked at the twins being loaded onto stretchers. "Both alive, both breathing. My grandfather taught me that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when you stop fighting the world and start dancing with it." The helicopter blades whirred overhead as the twins were prepared for transport to the trauma center in Phoenix. Both were stable, both conscious, both asking about the other. As the helicopters lifted off into the desert sky, Joseph Begay gathered his people and quietly walked back toward the reservation. His work was done, but the real test for the Chen brothers was just beginning. The intensive care unit at Phoenix Memorial Hospital was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of monitoring equipment. Marcus Chen lay in bed, his legs elevated and wrapped in complex medical devices. 3 surgeries had managed to save his legs, though doctors warned the road to recovery would be long and uncertain. In the bed next to him, separated only by a thin curtain, Michael fought a different battle. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the trauma surgeon who had operated on both brothers, stood at the foot of Michael's bed reviewing his chart. The internal injuries from the rockslide had been more severe than initially diagnosed. Despite successful surgery to repair a torn spleen and damaged kidney, complications had developed. An infection had set in, and Michael's body was struggling to respond to treatment. "How is he today?" Marcus asked, trying to see around the curtain. His voice was hoarse from the pain medication, but his concern for his twin was evident. "He's fighting, Marcus. That's all we can ask for right now," Dr. Martinez replied gently. She had been treating trauma patients for 15 years, but the bond between these brothers was unlike anything she had seen. Even in his own pain, Marcus's primary concern was always Michael. Sarah Patterson, Marcus's fiancée, had barely left the hospital since the accident 5 days ago. She sat between the 2 beds, reading to both brothers from a book of short stories they had enjoyed in college. Her voice was steady, but dark circles under her eyes revealed the toll the vigil was taking. "The doctors say Michael's white blood cell count is improving," she told Marcus, though her voice carried more hope than conviction. Marcus tried to shift in his bed to see his brother better, wincing as pain shot through his damaged legs. "Michael, can you hear me?" "Sarah's here. She's been reading that Hemingway collection we used to argue about. Remember how you said his characters were too stoic? I think you were right." A slight movement of Michael's hand was the only response, but it was enough to lift Marcus's spirits. Since the rescue, the brothers had communicated mostly through these small gestures. A squeeze of the hand, a flutter of eyelids, the slightest nod. The trauma had weakened their bodies but somehow strengthened their connection. Joseph Begay appeared in the doorway, carrying a small bundle wrapped in traditional cloth. The nursing staff had grown accustomed to his daily visits. Though his presence initially puzzled them, he wasn't family, wasn't even a friend before the accident. Yet something about the rescue had created a bond between the old Navajo man and the Chen twins. "How are our mountain climbers today?" Joseph asked softly, his weathered hands gentle as he placed the bundle on the table between the beds. "Joseph, you don't have to keep coming," Marcus said. "You've done so much already." "A rescue isn't finished until both feet are on solid ground," Joseph replied. "Besides, I made a promise to both of you under that rock. I don't make promises lightly." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a collection of small stones, each one carefully chosen from the Superstition Mountains. These are healing stones from the place where you were trapped. My grandmother taught me that sometimes a mountain's medicine comes from the mountain itself. Dr. Martinez watched with interest rather than skepticism. She had seen enough unexplained recoveries to keep an open mind about alternative healing practices. As long as they don't interfere with our treatment, I don't see any harm. Joseph placed one stone on each brother's bedside table. These aren't magic, he explained to Sarah, but they carry the strength of the mountain. Sometimes, that's enough to remind the body how to heal itself. Over the next few days, Michael's condition began to stabilize. The infection slowly receded, and his kidney function improved. Marcus, meanwhile, started physical therapy, determined to walk again despite doctors' cautious prognosis about permanent nerve damage. I need to be strong enough to help Michael when he wakes up properly, Marcus told his physical therapist, Janet, as she helped him through painful exercises to regain feeling in his legs. You're already helping him just by being here, Janet replied. But Marcus, you need to focus on your own recovery too. Michael will need you healthy, not heroic. Joseph often sat with the brothers during these therapy sessions, sharing stories of his own recovery from injuries suffered in his youth working construction. Healing isn't just about the body, he told Marcus during one particularly difficult session. The mountain taught me that. Sometimes the spirit needs to heal first before the body can follow. As the second week passed, Michael began to show more significant improvement. His eyes stayed open for longer periods, and he started responding to questions with small nods or head shakes. The first words he spoke were predictable. Marcus, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm here, brother. I'm right here, Marcus replied, reaching across the space between their beds to grasp Michael's hand. The reunion was emotional but brief. Michael's strength was still limited. However, it marked a turning point. From that day forward, both brothers seemed to heal faster, as if Michael's awakening had given them both permission to recover. Dr. Martinez marveled at their progress. I've seen twins before, but this is remarkable. It's as if they're healing in synchronization. Joseph wasn't surprised. That's how it was under the rock, too. When one was in pain, the other felt it. When one was afraid, the other gave strength. Some bonds run deeper than medicine can measure. As Michael grew stronger, the full story of their rescue began to emerge in their conversations. Marcus remembered every detail of Joseph's unconventional approach. How the mountain seemed to respond to patience rather than force. Michael's memories were hazier due to his injuries, but he recalled the sound of singing and a feeling of being lifted, not just by human hands but by something larger. I keep having dreams about the mountain, Michael told Joseph during one visit. Not nightmares, exactly, but dreams where I'm still there. But it's peaceful. Like the mountain is talking to me. What does it say? Joseph asked, genuinely curious. That I have work to do. Something about painting what I saw under that rock. The way the light looked. The feeling of being held by the earth itself. Joseph nodded knowingly. Sometimes an experience like this changes what we're meant to do with our lives. The mountain doesn't trap people without reason. This comment puzzled Dr. Martinez. Are you suggesting the accident was somehow meaningful? Not the accident, Joseph clarified. But the rescue. The choice to save both instead of accepting that one would die. That's the kind of moment that redirects a life's path. Marcus had been listening thoughtfully. Before this happened, I was so focused on my career in finance, on providing security for Sarah and our future family. But lying under that rock, feeling Michael's hand in mine, I realized I had no idea what really mattered. And what matters? Sarah asked gently. This, Marcus said simply, gesturing between himself and his brother. Connection. Being present for the people you love. Making choices based on love instead of fear. As the third week progressed, both brothers were moved out of intensive care into a regular recovery ward. They shared a room, finally able to see each other clearly and talk freely. The conversations ranged from childhood memories to plans for the future, but always returned to the moment under the rock when they thought they might lose each other forever. I kept thinking about all the times we'd fought over stupid things, Michael admitted. All the years in college when we barely talked because I thought you were too practical and you thought I was too much of a dreamer. We were both idiots, Marcus replied. Different doesn't mean incompatible. Maybe that's what we were supposed to learn from all this. Joseph's daily visits became a highlight for both brothers. He brought news from the reservation, stories about his grandchildren, and wisdom from a life lived close to the land. But he also brought updates about the rescue site. The boulder is gone, he told them one afternoon. Moved completely away from the trail. The mountain decided to finish what we started. Did it fall? Marcus asked. No, it moved on its own during the last rain. Settled into a natural depression where it won't trap anyone else. The mountain spirits have a sense of humor. They waited until you two were safe before they finished the job. Sarah had been listening to these conversations with growing fascination. As someone who worked in marketing, she was practical and logical, but the events surrounding the rescue had challenged her worldview. Joseph, do you really believe the mountain is alive in some way? Sarah, you've been sitting with these boys for 3 weeks, watching them heal in ways that surprise their doctors. You tell me, is there more to this world than what we can measure and explain? That evening, after Joseph had left, Sarah sat between the brothers' beds, thinking about his question. Marcus was asleep, but Michael was awake, sketching in a pad that physical therapy had given him to strengthen his hand coordination. What are you drawing? She asked. Michael turned the pad toward her. It was a rough but powerful sketch of 2 hands reaching toward each other through darkness, connected by a thin line of light. It's us, under the rock, he explained. But also something more. I keep seeing this image in my mind. 2 people choosing each other over everything else, even when logic says it's impossible. Is this what Joseph meant about the mountain giving you new purpose? Michael set down his pencil and looked at his sleeping brother. I think so. Before this, I painted pretty pictures that matched people's furniture. Now I want to paint something that matters, something about love being stronger than fear, about choosing hope when the odds are against you. And Marcus? What's his new purpose? Common. He doesn't know yet, but I think he's going to leave finance. He talks about it when he thinks I'm asleep. I think he wants to work with rescue teams, help other people the way Joseph helped us. Sarah felt a shift in her own thinking. The successful marketing career she had built, the comfortable life she and Marcus had planned. Suddenly it all seemed less important than being part of something meaningful, something that honored the second chance they had all been given. As the 4th week began, preparations started for the brothers' discharge from the hospital. Both had exceeded medical expectations for recovery, though they would need months of continued therapy. More importantly, they had developed a plan for moving forward that honored both their individual talents and their renewed understanding of what mattered most. We're going to start a foundation, Marcus announced to Joseph during his visit. Something that helps fund rescue operations in remote areas, but also supports traditional knowledge like yours. Too many people could benefit from what you know about reading the landscape. And I'm going to document the stories, Michael added. Not just paint them, but collect them. Stories of rescues, of people who chose courage over safety, of communities that still remember the old wisdom. Joseph smiled, the first truly broad smile they had seen from him since the rescue. Now you're beginning to understand what the mountain was trying to teach you. What do you mean? Sarah asked. That survival isn't about being strong enough to face the mountain alone. It's about being wise enough to know when you need each other, and brave enough to choose connection over self-preservation. These boys learned that lesson under several tons of rock. Most people never learn it at all. As discharge day approached, the brothers faced a new challenge. They had to return to the world beyond the hospital, to jobs and responsibilities, and the ordinary demands of daily life. But they were not the same people who had gone hiking in the Superstition Mountains 4 weeks earlier. The last night in the hospital, they lay awake talking about the future. Marcus would need months of physical therapy before he could walk without assistance. Michael was still weak, but his creative vision had become crystal clear. Both knew their lives had been permanently altered by their time under the mountain. "Do you think we'll stay this close?" Michael asked. "When life gets normal again, when we're not depending on each other to survive?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think we've learned something about choosing each other that we can't unlearn. The mountain didn't just save our lives, Michael. It taught us how to live them." In the morning, Joseph arrived early to help with their discharge. He had brought traditional gifts, hand-woven bracelets made by his daughter, meant to be worn as reminders of their connection to the mountain and to each other. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Dr. Martinez stopped by for a final check. "I've been practicing medicine for 15 years, and I've never seen a recovery quite like yours. Medically, you both should have had much more complicated healing processes. I can't explain it scientifically, but whatever happened in that mountain, it gave you both something extra." Joseph helped load their wheelchairs for the ride to the hospital entrance. "Doctor," he said quietly, "sometimes the best medicine isn't something you can prescribe. Sometimes it's something people find inside themselves when they have no choice but to trust each other completely." As they reached the hospital doors, both brothers paused to look back at the building where they had spent the last month relearning how to live. The automatic doors opened, and they moved forward into the Arizona sunshine, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives. 6 months after the rescue, Marcus Chen stood at the edge of the Superstition Mountains, his legs steady beneath him for the first time since the accident. The extensive physical therapy had paid off beyond medical expectations. While he still carried a slight limp that became more pronounced when he was tired, he could walk. He could climb. And most importantly, he could return to the place that had nearly killed him and his brother. Michael stood beside him, a professional camera hanging around his neck and a canvas satchel filled with art supplies. The past months had been transformative for both brothers, but perhaps most dramatically for Michael, who had discovered that his artistic vision had been fundamentally altered by the trauma and rescue. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Sarah asked, adjusting her own backpack. She had insisted on joining them for this return visit, understanding that closure could only come from facing the place that had changed their lives so completely. "We need to do this," Marcus replied, his eyes scanning the familiar terrain. "Joseph is waiting for us up there. And we made a promise." The promise had been made during their last week in the hospital. Joseph had asked them to return to the rescue site when they were strong enough to complete what he called the circle. He had been deliberately vague about what this meant, but both brothers trusted him enough to commit to the journey. The hike took them along the same trail they had followed 6 months earlier, but everything felt different now. Then, they had been two brothers on a casual adventure. Now, they moved with the deliberate steps of people who understood the desert's power and respected its moods. "Look at that," Michael said, stopping to point at a formation of rocks near the trail. "See how the light hits the red stone and makes it look like it's glowing from within? I never noticed details like that before the accident." Sarah watched Michael work, pulling out his sketch pad to capture the interplay of shadow and light. His art had indeed changed dramatically. Where his previous paintings had been technically skilled but emotionally distant, his new work carried an intensity and depth that had already attracted the attention of several galleries in Phoenix and Santa Fe. Marcus used the break to test his legs, doing the exercises his physical therapist had taught him to prevent cramping during long hikes. He had quit his job in finance 2 months earlier, despite Sarah's initial concerns about their financial security. The rescue foundation he and Michael had conceived in the hospital was becoming a reality, with initial funding coming from an unexpected source. A major insurance company that had become interested in funding wilderness rescue innovation after learning about their story. "How much further?" Sarah asked, checking her GPS device. "About 2 miles, Marcus replied. "The site is around the next ridge." As they climbed higher, they began to encounter other hikers who recognized them from news coverage of the rescue. The story had captured national attention, partly because of the dramatic rescue itself, but also because of the unconventional role Joseph Begay had played. Several news organizations had interviewed the brothers and Joseph, and a documentary filmmaker was planning a feature about traditional knowledge in emergency situations. "Marcus. Michael. a young woman called out, as they passed a group of college students taking a break. "We heard you were going to be hiking out here today. We just wanted to say your story inspired us to take wilderness survival classes." The attention was still uncomfortable for both brothers, but they had learned to accept it as part of their responsibility to share what they had experienced. Michael had begun incorporating the rescue story into his art, creating paintings that dealt with themes of survival, brotherhood, and the intersection of traditional and modern knowledge. As they approached the rescue site, the sound of voices carried on the desert wind. Joseph had brought a group of young people from the reservation, part of an informal program he had started to teach traditional wilderness skills to the next generation. "There they are," Joseph said, smiling as he saw the brothers approach. Right on time, as usual. The rescue site had been transformed. The massive boulder that had trapped them was indeed gone, settled into a natural depression about 50 yards away. Exactly as Joseph had predicted. Where the rock had been, a small shrine had been erected. Not by Joseph, but by other hikers who had heard the story and wanted to mark the place where 2 lives had been saved through an act of faith in traditional knowledge. "This is beautiful," Sarah said, examining the collection of stones, feathers, and small offerings that visitors had left. "People have been coming here regularly." "The mountain has become a teacher," Joseph explained. "People come here looking for their own answers, about courage, about choosing each other over fear. Your story has given this place a new kind of medicine." The young people from the reservation gathered around as Joseph began to tell the story of the rescue, but not the version that had appeared in newspapers and magazines. This was the version that emphasized the spiritual dimensions of the experience, the way the mountain had demanded patience and faith rather than force and technology. "The Chen brothers learned something that day about the old ways," Joseph told his students. "They learned that sometimes the answer isn't about fighting harder or using bigger machines. Sometimes the answer is about listening to voices that have been speaking for thousands of years." One of the students, a teenage girl named Maria, raised her hand. "But Joseph, how did you know the rocks would move that way? How could you be sure your method would work?" Joseph looked at Marcus and Michael, inviting them to participate in the answer. Marcus stepped forward. "I think the point isn't that Joseph knew for certain it would work," Marcus said slowly. "I think the point is that the methods everyone else was using definitely weren't working. Sometimes you have to choose between a guaranteed failure and an uncertain possibility." "But it was more than that," Michael added, pulling out his sketchpad and showing the students a drawing he had made of the rescue. "Joseph didn't just have a different technique. He had a different relationship with the mountain. He approached it as a partner, not an opponent." The sketch showed the rescue scene, but from an unusual perspective, as if viewed from above and inside the mountain simultaneously. The rocks appeared almost organic, like the bones and muscles of a living creature, with the trapped brothers cradled in its embrace rather than crushed by its weight. "Is that really how it felt?" Maria asked, studying the drawing. "Yes," both brothers said simultaneously, then looked at each other and laughed. "We did that a lot under the rock," Marcus explained. "Answered together without planning it, like we were sharing thoughts." Joseph nodded knowingly. Extreme situations can thin the veil between people who are already connected. "You two discovered something about brotherhood that most people never experience." As the afternoon progressed, Joseph's students practiced traditional techniques for reading landscape, identifying stable and unstable terrain, understanding the flow of water and the behavior of rocks during different weather conditions. Marcus and Michael found themselves learning alongside the teenagers, their own experience under the mountain having given them a deep appreciation for this kind of knowledge. "Marcus," called David, one of the older students, "what advice would you give to someone facing an impossible situation when it looks like there's no way out?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "Don't face it alone if you don't have to. And don't assume the obvious solution is the right solution. Sometimes you need to step back and look at the whole picture, not just the immediate problem, and be willing to trust people who see things differently than you do," Michael added. "Our natural instinct was to panic, to demand immediate action." Joseph's approach seemed too slow, too risky. But panic would have killed us. Trust saved us. As the sun began to set, painting the Superstition Mountains in the rich reds and purples that had inspired countless artists, Joseph gathered everyone into a circle near the shrine. "We're going to complete the circle now," he announced. "Marcus and Michael, this is your moment to release what happened here and carry forward what you learned." He handed each brother a stone from his collection of healing rocks. "These have been with me since the day we freed you from the mountain. Now they go back to where they belong." Following Joseph's lead, both brothers walked to the spot where the boulder had pinned them. The ground was still marked with scrapes and dents from the rescue equipment, but desert plants had already begun to reclaim the disturbed earth. Marcus knelt first, placing his stone in a small depression in the rock. "I release my fear of not being strong enough to protect the people I love," he said quietly. "I accept that sometimes the best protection is knowing when to ask for help." Michael placed his stone beside his brother's. "I release my fear of being a burden. I accept that my value isn't measured by my independence, but by my willingness to be part of something larger than myself." Sarah, witnessing this ceremony, felt moved to participate. She had no stone, but she picked up a small piece of granite from the ground and placed it with the others. "I release my need to control and plan everything. I accept that the most important things in life often come through paths we never could have imagined." One by one, Joseph's students and the other hikers who had gathered added their own stones and their own quiet commitments to letting go of fears and embracing new ways of thinking about challenge and community. As darkness settled over the mountains, Joseph built a small fire using traditional methods. The group sat in a circle around the flames, sharing food and stories. The conversation ranged from practical discussions of survival techniques to deeper reflections on the nature of courage and connection. "Joseph," Marcus said as the fire burned low, "I have a question I've been carrying for months. Why did you help us? You didn't know us. You could have just watched the professional rescuers do their work. What made you decide to get involved?" Joseph was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. "When I was a young man, about your age, I was working construction in Phoenix. There was an accident. A building collapse. I was trapped under debris for 6 hours before they got me out. The whole time, I kept thinking about my grandfather's stories, about how our people survived in these mountains for centuries without helicopters and hydraulic jacks." He paused, adjusting a piece of wood in the fire. "But when they finally rescued me, it was all modern equipment and professional crews. I was grateful, but I felt like something was missing. Like we had forgotten part of what it means to save each other. When I heard about your situation on the radio, I knew this was my chance to honor both ways of knowing, the old and the new." "So you weren't sure your method would work either," Michael observed. "I was sure the mountain would teach us what we needed to know, if we were willing to listen." "That's different from being sure of a specific outcome." Maria, the teenage student who had asked questions earlier, spoke up. "This is all beautiful. But what happens when we go back to our regular lives? How do we remember these lessons when we're dealing with normal problems?" It was a question that had been weighing on both brothers as well. The intensity of the rescue experience had created a clarity about what mattered most in life. But maintaining that clarity in the midst of daily routines and ordinary challenges was proving difficult. "That's why we come back here," Joseph said simply. "Not just to this place, but to these principles. We practice listening instead of demanding. We practice patience instead of force. We practice trusting each other instead of depending only on ourselves." "Is that why you started the foundation?" Sarah asked Marcus. "Partly," Marcus replied. "But also because I realized that what saved us wasn't just Joseph's traditional knowledge or the rescue team's equipment. It was the combination. Old wisdom, working with new technology. Different perspectives coming together to create possibilities that wouldn't have existed separately. The foundation funds rescue equipment and training," Michael explained to the group. "But we also support programs like this one, where young people learn traditional skills that complement modern emergency response techniques." As the evening progressed, several members of the group shared their own stories of moments when they had to choose between safety and courage, between self-preservation and community connection. A pattern emerged. The most meaningful experiences in their lives had come when they moved beyond their comfort zones and trusted in relationships and knowledge that couldn't be easily measured or guaranteed. "I think that's what the mountain taught us," Marcus said as the fire burned down to embers. "Not just how to survive being trapped under a rock, but how to live without being trapped by fear, and how to recognize that we're stronger together than we ever could be alone," Michael added. Joseph stood up, signaling that the ceremony was coming to an end. "The circle is complete now. You came here as visitors who needed to be rescued. You leave as teachers who can help others find their own strength." As the group prepared to hike back down the mountain by moonlight, each person took a moment at the shrine to leave their own offering and make their own commitment to carrying forward the lessons of courage, community, and trust in wisdom that transcends individual understanding. Marcus and Michael were the last to leave. They stood together at the site of their rescue, no longer victims of the mountain but students who had learned its most important lesson. "We should come back here every year," Michael suggested. "Agreed," Marcus said. "Same time, same place. A reminder of who we want to be." As they started down the trail, Sarah walking between them, both brothers felt the profound satisfaction that comes from completing a difficult journey. They had returned to face the mountain not as conquerors, but as grateful students who had learned that survival and healing were not individual achievements, but community gifts. Behind them, the shrine stood silent in the moonlight, marking not just the place where 2 lives had been saved, but the birth of a new understanding of what it means to choose love over fear, together over alone, and wisdom over force, in a world that often forgets these ancient truths. The Superstition Mountains had given them more than their lives back. It had given them a mission, a purpose, and a bond that would define the rest of their days. Joseph's promise under the rock had been kept. Both twins were free, both were whole, and both had discovered that the most powerful rescues are the ones that save not just life, but meaning.